Um, can you guys move forward so we can like see each other better and we can like get to hear Mr. Gardner and Mrs. Gardner later on? So H and up, everyone who's sitting behind row H, come sit forward in these front rows.
That's really good, Albert. So we can hear the Gardners better. Be more spiritually involved. Yeah, yeah.
All right, we'll start song service off today with Marching to Zion. Come we that love the Lord, and let our joys be known. Join in a song with sweet accord. Join in a song with sweet accord. And thus surround the throne, and thus surround the throne. We're marching to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upwards to Zion, the beautiful city of God. Let those refuse to sing who never knew our God. Children of the heavenly King, but children of the heavenly King may speak their joys abroad, may speak their joys abroad. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upwards to Zion, the beautiful city of God. The hill of Zion yields 1,000 sacred sweets. Before we reach the heavenly fields, before we reach the heavenly fields, or walk the golden streets, or walk the golden streets. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching up Zion, the beautiful city of God. Our songs abound and every tear be dry. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground. We're marching through Emmanuel's ground to fairer worlds on high, to fairer worlds on high. We're marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. We're marching upwards to Zion, the beautiful city of God. All right, our next song tonight will be Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. That's Leaning on the Everlasting Arms. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I'll have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, leaning, leaning on the everlasting arms. All right, please stand for our final song, our opening song, and that is Seeking the Lost. So please stand for Seeking the Lost. Seeking the lost, yes, kindly entreating wanderers on the mountain astray. Come unto me, his message repeating, words of the Master speaking today. Going afar upon the mounts, bringing the wander back again into the fold of my Redeemer, Jesus the Lamb for sinners slain. Seeking the lost and pointing to Jesus, souls that are weak and hearts that are sore, leading them forth in ways of salvation, showing the path to life evermore. Going afar upon the mountain, bringing the wander back again, into the fold of my Redeemer, Jesus the Lamb for sinners slain. Thus I would go on missions of mercy, following Christ from day unto day, cheering the faint and raising the fallen, pointing the lost to Jesus the way. Going afar upon the mountain, bringing the wander back again, into the fold of my Redeemer, Jesus the Lamb for sinners slain. Thank you so much for singing. You may be seated. All right, let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you so much that it's finally your Sabbath. I thank you for all the blessings that you have brought us this week. I thank you for our friends, our family that we get to sit next to. I pray that you help us to draw closer to them this year, just as we draw closer to you. Lord, I pray that you continue to be in our lives. Lord, show your presence. I know that you have shown your presence in Mr. and Mrs. Gardner's life. I pray that you help them to, I pray that you speak through them, and I pray that you help them to teach us many things. And thank you so much for working in their lives. Thank you that they go to this school, and thank you that we can also go to this school so we can learn more about them and we can see how you have worked. In your name, pray, amen.
Okay, so I'm going to be singing a special music. It's called Don't You Dare. And as you listen to the lyrics, it's kind of written in the perspective of Jesus talking to one of his followers. So just think of it as like Jesus talking to you, I guess. Don't you know your smile lights up the darkness, and in your eyes sets the world on fire? You should know you're more than just this moment in time. So take a breath and hold your head a little higher. Don't you know there's purpose in your story? So don't hold back and keep it to yourself. And I know it's hard to see the love surrounding you, so but I hear your heart cry out for help. In this war that you're fighting, you are not fighting alone. You are not fighting alone. Hear the thunder, feel the lightning. When we'll stand against the storm, and we'll be standing when it's gone. I'm never gonna give up hope, so don't you dare. I'm never gonna give up hope, so don't you dare. That every turn you think you've been defeated, it's taken all you have to just get through. Oh, and even though you may not see it now, hope is reaching out its arms for you. In this war that you're fighting, you are not fighting alone. You are not fighting alone. Hear the thunder, feel the lightning, but we're standing in the storm, and we'll be standing when it's gone. I'm never gonna give up hope, so don't you dare. I'm never gonna give up hope, so don't you dare. Ah, 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 don't you, ah, ah, ah. In this war that you're fighting, you are not fighting alone. You are not fighting alone. Hear the give up hope, so don't you dare. I'm never gonna give up hope, so don't you dare.
I know, right? It's so different. Good evening. I'm glad you guys moved up a little bit because I always like that a whole lot better. I wanted to share with you my favorite Bible verse. Lynette knows that I've never been good with favorites. I couldn't really tell you what my favorite dessert is or my favorite entree or very many favorites. I have very few favorites in the world, so it took me a long time to establish some of my favorites, although Indian food is definitely my favorite. Yeah. But this has definitely worked itself into being my favorite Bible verse of all times, and it's something that Lynette and I have applied to our lives, and it goes like this. This is from Proverbs 3. Some of you are probably already thinking in your mind. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. It says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll direct your paths." And that's been something that sometimes is a little tough to do, but sometimes you just don't know where to go or how to get there, and you just have to put your faith in God. And that's what Lynette and I are hoping we can share some of our story tonight. Now, how many of you have never seen Mrs. Gardner before tonight? Any of you? Okay, a few. All right, that's cool. How many of you have never talked to her before? Raise your hand. Oh, wow, Lynette, that's quite a few. How many of you have never seen Mr. Gardner before tonight? Okay, stop it. Well, I wanted to give her just a second. Yeah, all right. I wanted to give her just a second to introduce herself, which I could do for her, but it just seemed appropriate that she would introduce herself a little bit and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, so I feel better that more of you know me than I thought. But I'm Lynette Gardner, and I got a new job this year. I used to be up the hill, and I was the principal and kindergarten teacher there. And this year I switched gears, and I work for Matthew Romashko. You might have known his daughters who went to school here. He's a lawyer, and I am one of his administrative assistants. So it's a new challenge for me this year, but one that I'm really enjoying.
Well, I have to say, one of the things I admire about Lynette, she has had a lot of challenges in her life, and she likes new things. We both love trying new restaurants. We are foodies if ever there were some. And so any chance we get, to get to a bigger city and try something new, we like to do that. And but this opportunity for you to work for an attorney has been totally out of your normal comfort zone. But I think you've been grooming your way into that. Administration definitely helped with that. And it's really neat to see you enjoying that a lot and discovering new things. You'll learn. Everybody finds what works for them. Mr. Gardner and Mrs. Gardner, to some extent, we just like trying new things all the time, and sometimes a new job is something that's kind of fun. I know you enjoyed being a principal, and you enjoyed being a kindergarten teacher a lot. My basement proves that. Mrs. Gardner has a lot of bins, and she stores all of her kindergarten stuff. It can't all fit in bins, but then I started building her shelves, and then I started building her more shelves, and then I started reinforcing and building even more shelves. So we've got quite a bit of stuff there, and I'm glad.
You have some computer stuff in there too.
I do. I have some bins. I finally had to get rid of, I had a whole bin of nothing but telephone wires. You remember the old phone lines, old phone wires for your house, and oh my goodness. So I just finally had to throw away, I don't know, probably at 80. I don't know why, but I was a phone guy, that's probably why. So about myself. So most of you guys know, obviously all of you know that I'm Mr. Gardner, and I work for the school doing IT type stuff. I didn't always do IT. I've always been interested in computers. I thought about it after we were on our way here tonight, going, I should have shown him my very first computer, but you would have just laughed at it anyway. But I can tell you this, I had a 20 megabyte hard drive. I remember telling Lynette, I came home, I was so excited. I said, Lynette, I am never going to have to buy another hard drive in my whole life. It's so huge. And so anyway, that was my Zenith Easy PC that I made payments on for a very long time. But when I was at Andrews, there was only one person in the entire dorm that had a computer, and it was my suite mate. Computers in the dorm, full of computers in the halls, red computers, pretty crazy days. So computers have always been something that I've been interested in. But when I graduated from Andrews, my real interest was telephony, which is telephones. Telephones ruled the internet world for the longest time because all of the internet rode on phone lines. Now it's changed. Now the internet lines actually carry phone calls. So it's an interesting world and an interesting flip there. So I've changed with the job and had a lot of fun along the way, but that's a whole nother story. So we're going to go through our story a little bit, tell a little bit about ourselves separately, and then explain about our lives together. And hopefully what you'll see, what we're hoping we demonstrate, is all along the way, Lynette and I have tried hard to lean not on our own understanding, and in our ways to acknowledge Him and see that He has been directing our paths. And that's been a real pleasure for us. So Tanner, if you'd be kind enough to give us that first slide, that'd be awesome. Oh, actually they're not too teeny-weeny, but teeny-weeny enough. That's nice. In the beginning, Mom's answer to prayer. So the story my mom explains to me, I'm actually the third-born child out of four. I have an older brother, an older sister, and a younger sister. I was number 3. My older brother and sister, my brother is 6 years older than me, and my sister is 7 years older than me. And my mom and dad were quite happy with 2 children. And my mom said she was convinced that's all she was going to have. And then she was about 7 years into the marriage, was starting to feel a little trapped in the marriage, and was actually starting to wonder if she needed to get out of this marriage. Not that my dad was a bad man in any way, she just was young and felt like she hadn't seen everything in the world. She was raised as an Adventist, but when she started dating, she went to Auburn Academy, by the way, some of you people from the Pacific Northwest. And but when she started dating, she decided that Christianity wasn't something that she really needed. My father and her got married, and they were not Christian or Adventist, didn't go to church for the most part or anything like that. And all of a sudden, my mom found out she was pregnant with me. Then she said she really, really felt trapped. She felt like she couldn't go anywhere, couldn't do anything, and she was heartbroken. And about this time, she heard a knock on the door, and it was a call porter, a Seventh-day Adventist call porter, and he was coming around with the Your Story Hour books, or the bedtime stories and Bible stories. And he had those books, and my mom just bought every one of them. My dad and my mom had a great relationship. When he came home and she said she just bought $300-400 worth of books, I'm sure he didn't even think anything of it. But Mom was just that way sometimes, and she was a surprising character. She was a redhead all the way. And so Mom said she got those books, and she began to have evening worship with the family. It was a little bit of a surprise for my older brother and sister, but that's part of the reason why my middle name is Andrew, is she just wanted to have some kind of a tie back to this religion that she wanted to reinvigorate in her life, because she realized that's what she was missing. And she began filling that hole in her heart with Christ, and that was really cool. I had a younger sister came along right after that. We're 1 year, 1 month, 5 days, and 15 minutes apart. So, yeah, kind of handy to know, right? As you can see from the pictures, I was a terribly ugly kid. No, just kidding. Although I can see that the studio photographer did something to make me kind of look all right in that upper corner. That's all right. I can live with that. And Lynette said when she was looking for pictures, she wanted to put the one of me climbing out from underneath the TV, because I always was interested in technology. My grandfather had all kinds of stories. I was telling Mrs. Ward about today. I can remember there were times when I'd come home, we'd be at the house, my parents got a phone call, and Grandpa says, "Was Todd in the basement?" And my dad says, "Well, I think so. He's everywhere, you know." And Grandpa goes, well, my furnace doesn't work anymore. And I found the switch and turned off the switch and those kind of things. I just loved it. I took everything apart in the house. At one point, I put intercoms, I wired the whole house for sound, had speakers everywhere. My mom said the bathroom and her bedroom were two places that were not allowed. So other than that, I had the whole place rigged, and I could play music everywhere, and it was really ridiculous. But that's kind of my growing up. Yeah, we always went to church school. My mom, we went to the Troy Seventh Adventist Church. I went to the Troy Church School for my kindergarten year. My sweet kindergarten teacher. I was very hyperactive. I know that would not surprise any of you. As a child, we called it hyperactive. That was before we came up with this ADHD type definition. And was I also there? No, I'm sorry. Kindergarten was across the street. First grade was at the church school. And the first grade teacher used to call home. And my mom would say, she'd answer the phone, and she could hear this lady crying already. And she says, hello? And it's the first grade teacher. And she says, Mrs. Gardner, I don't know what to do with Todd. And she says, well, have you taken him out and prayed with him? Yes, 3 times already. Oh, okay. Well, did you make him run around the church a couple of times? Because we were in the church itself, was where the first grade class. Yeah, he ran around 3-4 times already, and I don't know what to do. So I was a little bit of a struggle. But shortly after that, again, I told you my mom's a woman of surprises. We had a cabin up in West Branch area. It's more towards an hour south of Campo Savo, about an hour north of here and an hour south of Campo Savo. And we would go up to the cabin and spend Christmases, Thanksgivings, holidays and stuff. But summers, we would just go up and stay up there the whole summer. I was born and raised down in the Detroit, Royal Oak, Clawson area. Went to the Troy Church, told you. Was born in Royal Oak Hospital. But one summer, my mom at the end of the summer just said, Ray, I enrolled the kids in school. We are not going back. And he goes, okay, I'll go sell the house. And that's just, I'm telling you, the two of them just had the most interesting relationship. I'll tell you another little quickie that was kind of funny. My older sister, when she first went to kindergarten, we all had the same kindergarten teacher. My older sister went to kindergarten, and a year later, my older brother went to kindergarten. And my mom said that when she was at a parent-teacher conference, the teacher asked her, she says, Mrs. Gardner, can I ask you a question? She says, yeah. She says, I take it you and your husband, you don't argue very often. And she says, well, yeah, I guess, yeah, we really don't fight very often. And she says, why do you ask? And the teacher said, well, last year, she says, kindergartners are kindergartners. They say the craziest things that fall out of their head, as you know. And she says, last year, for show and tell, your sister, my sister Cindy, told a story about this big fight that my parents had had. And the teacher thought, sometimes couples fight. A year later, when my brother Dean was in kindergarten, for show and tell, Dean told a story about my parents fighting, and the teacher said, wait, that's the exact same fight. I can tell from the story. And so they just thought that was kind of funny. And it is true, really, the kids, we've thought about it and talked about it. I really am only aware of twice ever that my parents fought. But my dad was a truck driver. He drove steel for the auto industry all week long. He would only come home late on Friday night. And we'd go, Daddy's home, Daddy's home. We'd go running out and give him a hug. And then he would always leave Sunday night. Oh, we'll miss you, Dad, So I'm sure my parents, they only got to see each other for a couple of days a week. So they didn't have much time to fight. They were just glad to see each other when they saw each other. That's pretty much our story. We went to church school. When we moved up to West Branch, we went to the Mayo Church School for a very long time. Then when I graduated, I was really interested in going to Academy. And that was a real blessing that worked out, because my father was not, he was not an Adventist. He was not opposed to religion. He wasn't opposed to Adventism. But he was very adamant about, he was already paying for education through his taxes. He was not going to pay tuition at all. My mom says that's totally fine. She says, I'll take a side job when the kids are in school to pay for the tuition. And that was my parents' arrangement. And they were really, really happy with that. And my dad, later on, when I was in college, he told my mom how much he was very, very glad that his kids had gone to church school, and he felt that made a difference in their lives. That was kind of nice. What about you?
Wow. He's a
You don't
tough
have to
act
talk as long as I
follow.
do because, it's almost time to wrap up now. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. That's good for me. Well, my next slide has a number of interesting pictures. And while Todd said his was an answer to prayer for his mom, my story has more of I guess I was always called my mom's miracle baby. And when I was a kid, I didn't really properly appreciate it. I was kind of more embarrassed by it than anything else. My mom had the picture that's in the my upper left, your upper right corner, and she would carry that in her wallet. When we'd go in a store and she'd be going through her wallet, that picture would come out, and people would always comment about it, and I would just cringe with embarrassment. Because when you're a kid, you always want that cute baby picture, and I looked at that picture, and I was just like, ooh, that's just so awful.
So why does that picture look that way?
Okay, so we're getting to that. So the reason why that looks like that is because I was born at 24 weeks. And so that's pretty rare, and it was rare then. And the back side of that story...
How many weeks is normal?
Okay, so that's 6 months, and normally you're born at 40 weeks. So that's quite a difference.
So you were almost half-baked.
Yeah, half-baked, if you want to call it. I don't know. Probably like that term, but... the backside of that story, many of you know my older sister, Lori, who's Miss Lori at the cafeteria. She's my big sister, and, well, if you didn't know it, you know it now. She's my big sister, and there's 5 years between Lori and I. And between my older sister and myself, my mom had 2 miscarriages, and then she had 2 babies that were born that only lived a couple of days. So by the time she got pregnant with me, she had already lost 4 children. And she was very worried about losing me. When she went to the doctors, they finally discovered what's wrong. She had something, what they call an incompetent cervix. She would go so far in the pregnancy, and the cervix couldn't handle it, and it would break open, and the baby would come early. So when they discovered that, one of the things that they did when I was born was they sewed her cervix shut. And a lot of times that works, but not always. My parents' marriage was very troubled at that point. There was a lot of stresses in their life, and the stress just took a toll on my mom. And because of that, I came early. And I know that added pressure to my parents. The unique thing about this, when I look back on it, is I've still met people today that said, we remember when you were born, and we remember the people at church praying for you, that you would live. They didn't give her very much hope. Back in those days, if you were in the NICU, you basically had an incubator and a little oxygen cup, and that was it. There really wasn't anything else. So it was, good luck, we'll see if you make it. So every day that went on, the better chance I had of surviving. Now that picture there was taken when I was 3 weeks old. So I was about 1 pound, 7 ounces at that time. So when I was born, I was 12 inches long, and I weighed 1 pound, 3 ounces, which is pretty tiny. And
It's actually remarkably tiny.
yes, very, very.
Even today, to save a child that's born at 24 weeks is remarkable. And most children born at 24 weeks would definitely have lung issues or other developmental issues. There's just, being born that early is a real risk. Eyes, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I've jokingly told people for years that the only thing we know that's wrong with her is her choice of men, but other than that, she's done well.
So anyways, that was a rather unique beginning for me. And it wasn't until later in life, when I had my own children, that I realized really what a miracle it was that God had some reason and some purpose in my life to make it that I would stay around. And then the other pictures are just pictures of me when I was really little. My parents ultimately split when I was a couple years old. When my mom, not long after my mom got divorced, she got remarried to a non-Adventist. So for a while, it was kind of difficult in our family. My mom would do family worship with my sister and I, and my stepdad would go and watch the ball game or go do something else. And he had 2 kids from his previous marriage, so I had a stepbrother and a stepsister. And he told us later on that eventually it just got to the point where he said, I had to make a decision that either your mom was going to leave the church or I was going to join the church because our marriage just couldn't survive this. So he ended up taking Bible studies and he joined the church. And that was a real blessing. But both of my parents did not grow up Adventist, so they became Adventist later on. So a lot of things were new to them. The whole concept of family worship was something they didn't ever know or understand. And just a lot of things that people take for granted were new to them. And so ultimately it had an effect on on us kids. What was really neat for my mom a little bit into how she got into the church, and this is where you can see witnesses from other people in your life, is when my mom was in her teens, she was the eldest of 7 kids, very poor family. There was an Adventist couple that took an interest in her and invited her to work for them. And so she started working for them, and that was her introduction to the church. And they were always very interested in young people, and they wanted to help her in her education. So her sophomore year, she actually came up to the academy here when it was called Cedar Lake Academy and attended for 1 year. When she went back home, she had to go back to public school. She couldn't afford to come back. And then she kept working, and this couple really wanted her to have Adventist education. And so they ended up, which this is going to sound really strange, they ended up adopting her because that was the only way that they could get the tuition assistance to help her through school. So they adopted her, and that was how she got into the church.
Now, I just learned something new because I didn't realize your mom ever was at Cedar Lake.
Yes, she was here
But she
1 year.
graduated from Grand Ledge.
Right.
But she actually went here to Cedar Lake.
She actually went here 1 year.
In the old ad building, and definitely
Yes.
in the old dorms
Yep.
that aren't here anymore, but yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of really how my family got into the church, really, was ultimately through my step-grandparents. And they were a real light and witness to our family and helped us just because we really were new to Adventism. I went to public school for kindergarten, and then the rest of my schooling, I went to Adventist schools. That was very important to my mother, and especially to her adopted parents. They really wanted to see us in school, so we went to Adventist school. My stepbrother and stepsister would come to our house on weekends. They went to public school, while the rest of us went to church school. And I'm always grateful for that opportunity that we had to be able to go to church school. And back then, everybody carpooled. That was the way you got to school, was you carpooled. And if we hadn't had that opportunity, I don't think we would have been in school, because my parents weren't able to always do transportation. And so that was a big part of our Christian experience for school.
So this is something that was foreign to me because I came from, a typical, which is not typical, but a traditional home, right? Mom and dad married, mom and dad no problems, brothers and sisters are all from the same mother and father. Whereas when I met Lynette, these were maybe not foreign concepts, but I really got to see firsthand this idea of yours, mine, and ours, because her mother had Lori and her father had Sheila and Tony, and then together they had Sandy. So, that's a mix that introduces a lot of new things into the house. Next slide, please, Mr. Tanner. Oh, wow, that's interesting. I put this one in there because it's just kind of funny. I thought we didn't discover this until we'd been married for a while, and I thought, God must really chuckle. One day I was talking with Lynette's family, and I mentioned that we lived in Clawson. I remember the address. It was drilled into our heads. Anybody that lives in the city probably ought to be. But it was 588 Parkland, Clawson, Michigan. And 558 Parkland. Anyway, Lynette's mom goes, oh, we used to live in Parkland too. And I go, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how close we lived. We started checking addresses, and I said, you got to be kidding me. I could have tossed a ball from my backyard into her yard. She's in the red there in the apartment complex. She ended up leaving when you were, what, age 5 or something? Or must be a little younger than that, 3 or 2. And then I'm in that, I don't know, it looks like aqua, green, blue, whatever color that is up there is where our house was. But it's funny that, and here's what's funny to me. When Lynette was born, that's where I lived. Lynette was born at the Pontiac Hospital, and her mother went to the Pontiac Church. My sister was born 1 month premature, whereas Lynette was in the hospital for 3 months. My sister was in the hospital for at least a month. My sister, we went to the Troy Church, and we were born at William Beaumont there in Royal Oak, Troy area. So it's funny that the two, we just lived this close, but I think God must have kind of snickered a little bit and thought, no, you guys are not meant to, to touch yet. And we just didn't. So it's kind of funny. All right, give us that next slide. Now, then we first met. And how was it that we first met, Lynette? I know, right? Listen, this isn't even the good pictures. In those days, in the 80s, we would unbutton them all the way down to here. So we met because both of us, academy was expensive.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really easy for us. And so what we would do is during the summertime, I would work at camp meeting. And maybe some of you guys have done the same thing. But I would go to camp meeting, and we basically contacted the ABC, and we said, boy, is there anything Todd could do to earn some money while he's at camp meeting? And sure enough, they assigned me to the store to work with this gentleman stocking shelves, who I would later on get to know really, really well because he ended up being a church member of ours. But I knew him then, and he was, what a character. What a character Ed was. And lo and behold, Lynette was working there too. What were you doing?
So it was at the end of my sophomore year before I was going to be a junior, and my uncle worked for Loma Linda Foods, and he said, would you mind helping us out at camp meeting? I need somebody to stock shelves of the Loma Linda Foods in the camp store. And I said, sure, I'd like to earn some money for school. So I said, yeah, I'd be glad to do it. So I came to camp meeting, and I went to the store, and that's where I first saw Todd.
So I was at the store stocking everything other than vegetarian food products. In those days, camp meeting was huge. Grand Ledge camp meetings, we would have 50,000 people on the weekends. It's huge. The store stocked milk, bread, eggs, bananas, fruit. We stocked everything, ice, all of that was in the store. And I stocked and maintained everything in the store, mopped or did whatever was necessary in the store, with the exception of the vegetarian food products, which still was about 1/2 of the store. And Lynette's stocking, really half of the vegetarian products were from Worthington, the other half are from Loma Linda, and she's stocking all those Loma Linda products. There was one other gentleman, Jim, so the three of us got to know each other really well. All summer, stinking hot summer, we would sneak, air conditioning was really uncommon in those days. And we would sneak into the freezer and just kind of stand, try to cool down in the freezer, the three of us. We had a lot of fun. It was something else. So that's where we first met. I guess to wrap it up quickly is I had been dating a young lady that ended up not working out at camp meeting. Lynette kind of expressed an interest. That is such a small picture, but Lynette is really, really cute and really young. It's kind of scary how young she looks. And so we got to know each other, and there was a little bit of a heartthrob. There's been a debate for about 30 years in our marriage, but I think we finally settled on the fact that it's possible that she kissed me, is what we think happened, as we were leaving camp. So.
Okay, I admit it was me. I was desperate.
No, that was.
Well, actually.
That's cool because I was pretty clueless.
Actually, if I have to be honest, I was like, this guy's going to Adelphian, which you have to realize back in those days, Adelphian and Cedar were rival schools. Oh, yeah. So I'm like, I meet this really cute, fun guy, and where is he going to school? Adelphian. So I'm like, well, I might as at least get a kiss out of this.
And you did. So that was pretty cool. I'll tell you, I was like, so I thought about her a whole lot into my senior year. And actually, we became pen pals. Pen pals, there's this thing called U.S. Postal Service where people would write on paper and they would stick a stamp on it and then mail things back and forth. And so we wrote back and forth. You want to say it, go for it.
Yeah. So, the letter writing was huge. And it was really important because I had decided that I was going to come here to Cedar Lake Academy at the time. I knew that Grand Ledge was closing. It was a day school I'd been to for 2 years. And I didn't want to be a one-year senior. So I was really nervous. I'd never been away from home before, ever. I didn't know anybody, didn't know my roommate. I was really scared. And I was telling Todd about it at camp meeting. I'm scared. I'm going to a new school. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he's like, no, Lynette, this is really fun. You'll love it. Boarding academy is great. And anyway, so we decided to write, and we exchanged addresses. And so I'll never forget, my parents brought me here, dropped me off in the dorm, and I just thought, I don't know about this. And in my mailbox that had my name on it were 2 letters, and they were 2 letters from Todd. So when I first got here, I ripped those open. Didn't really show anybody because, again, it's from a Delphian. And
which I
read
wrote
them.
in big print on the outside.
Yes, he did. And I read those, and it just made my day because I was so nervous about being here. And so
Where
it was
are all those letters?
I have all of them in a little cedar box.
Every one of them?
Every single one of them.
Where are the letters that you wrote me?
Gone, because he didn't save my letters.
Guys, do save letters. It will save you in the end.
And
Every now and then she will pull out these letters. Oh, I remember when you wrote this.
And it's cool too. If I had had more time, I would have scanned one in to show you, because for a guy, I give him a lot of credit. He had some really unique stationery. One of his stationery things had a little puppy dog on it, which I thought was really cute, and just other stationery. So I thought he's pretty creative for a guy, because I just didn't expect that. But he was a very good letter writer, and it was a big part of the reason that I made it through academy. Boarding academy was tough for me. I had a really hard time, and so his letters reaching out to me really helped.
Not me. I'm a social butterfly. I loved academy. It was pretty awesome. So much going on. I remember telling my mom, she would say, how's the food? I said, oh, love it. It is fantastic. She goes, my cooking's that bad, huh? My cooking's so bad that you like cafeteria food. I'm like, no, I'll eat anything. So, no, academy worked out really well for me. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed boarding school. I had a lot of fun, so it was a neat thing. I was, of course, a year ahead of you. Mm-hmm. So when I was done with academy, I went to Andrews. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please.
Oh, and I was going to add one thing. Oh, here's our senior pictures. There we are.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. So your senior year, of course, is a year that you got to decide what you're going to do, where you're going to go. And actually, I jumped ahead of you, didn't I?
That's right.
And I had prayed and praying about it, where I wanted to go to school. College was not a big deal in my family, and yet it was really important to me to go to college. My parents pretty much said, if you get through academy, after this, you're on your own. So I knew I had to find a way to do it, and I wasn't sure how I was going to make it happen. And so I'd been praying, Lord, show me the way, what I should do, where I should go. And when I was here at the academy my senior year, I worked for Mr. Heslop in the guidance office. And when the gentleman from Andrews came to visit the school, I helped set up a lot of the visits for the seniors. And so all day I worked with 2 of these gentlemen, coordinating visits and stuff. And at the end of the day, one of the gentlemen I think he was like the vice president for admissions at Andrews. He asked me what my plans were. And I said, I didn't know yet. I knew I wanted to go to college. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. And on the spot, he offered me a job. And I was like, are you serious, for real? And he said, yep. He said, you come to Andrews, you have a job, you can start this summer. And so I said, okay. And I think as soon as graduation was over, my mom took me down to Andrews. I remember it was graduation weekend. It was Sunday, and the next day I showed up to work at the admissions office at Andrews. And I came sailing through the door off to the admissions office just to find out that they didn't know who I was. And I said, "What do you mean you don't know who I am? I'm here for my summer job." And they're like, "We don't know who you are." It's like, okay, somebody better figure this out because I got his job. And I discovered that the guy that hired me had just left, and he had not told them that he had promised me a summer job. So now I'm like, I have all my stuff here, people. I have nowhere to go. And bless her heart, the assistant VP, Joanne Minder, was a wonderful lady. She said, "Come into my office." And I went to her office and I told her the whole story. And, and I said, this was what I felt was God's answer to the prayer, that I need to be here. What do you mean there's no job? And so they did some research, found out, yes, I had been promised a job. And I worked there my whole college career at admissions, great people. And I just felt so impressed that God had made that opportunity possible so that I could go to college.
So my college story is really very similar in that regard, that although at the end of my senior year I went to work at Camp Sabo, and I worked at Camp Sabo for 2 summers. But when I first arrived at Andrews at the beginning of my freshman year, I didn't know how it was going to happen. Even when I signed up to go to camp, I didn't know how I could financially make Andrews work. And my father, he ended up getting cancer. He ended up dying my sophomore year at college. But before that, he went on disability, and Social Security disability. And so I was paid, I don't even remember, whatever it was. It was small. It was maybe $1,200 or whatever it was. But you know what? It was exactly the $1,200 that I needed in order to enroll at Andrews, at least for that one semester or that one term. And so I just remember that money coming in from the Social Security Administration, and I was like, wow, that's the Lord was really opening up the door for me to get to Andrews. And Lynette and I have chuckled about it since then, because really every quarter I would pay for and all my friends were the same way. We paid for this quarter not knowing at all how we were going to pay for the next quarter. And but we would get through this quarter, and then somehow the window would open and we'd make things work, and it would work out for the next quarter, and so on and so forth. Lynette and I both, the whole way through college, we ended up working probably about 40 hours a week, in addition to pulling our full normal school load. Consequently, it took both of us 5 years to finish our undergraduate degrees. And so yeah, that was just another time when I thought, wow, God just made this work. I felt like he was showing me the way that he wanted me was to be at Andrews. And I, like you, my older sister did a little bit of college. My older brother was definitely not college bound. Nobody in my family had gone to college. My mom went to college for a little while, but she says she went on the boys' plan, which meant she went to study arts and PE. But she was really there to find a young man, and she didn't. She found my dad on the beach, so that was pretty interesting. He was a Michigan boy stationed out west, and she was trying, I can't get the sunscreen on my back thing, and he fell for it. And then he married her and drug her all the way back to Michigan. That's another side story.
So I got to back up just a little bit because this comes right about the time that we went to college. So we wrote for 2 years, and right at the end, yeah, he hates this. This is why those letters are so important, because they really come back years later in a good way. So we wrote for 10 years. We wrote for 2 years, and at the end of 2 years, it was right around the time of my senior graduation. Of course, we had talked in letters about where I was going to go, and he mentioned Andrews and how much he was enjoying it and that type of thing. And it wasn't the very last letter, but it was, I think, the next to the last letter where he told me he met the woman of his dreams.
Oh, man. I told her later on, I figured out she might have been the woman of my dreams, but I didn't realize it was nightmares. It wasn't real dreams, per se. Not those good kind of dreams, anyway. It didn't work out real well, anyway.
So that kind of tempered me a little bit, because I thought, oh, man, he's met the woman of his dreams? Good grief. And I think we had one more letter after that, and then they just stopped. So by the time I got there my freshman year, I probably saw him once or twice my freshman year, if that. And then my sophomore year, we ended up having a Bible class together, and I sat behind him.
All right, well, so just to toss in here real quick, this young lady that I was dating at college, she ended up going to Cologne-sur-Salève, which is the Adventist college in France. She was studying French and some French studies, and I thought I would surprise her and go over for Christmas. And, you know, international travel today is a lot more than it was then, right? So I planned all of this. I found me tickets on Icelandic Air, which I didn't even know existed. I took out a loan from the bank so I could buy these airplane tickets. And I flew over there only to discover that when I arrived, because I wanted to surprise her. When you'd write a letter, I'd stick a letter in the mailbox on Monday. She would get it the following Monday. Then if she wrote back and says, no, don't come, I wouldn't get it for another week still. So I had this all planned out. I'm going to surprise her. I'll write the letter on Monday, and then she'll get it on Monday, and come to find out I'm arriving on Tuesday. Woo! It's so exciting. Except for when I got there, I found out that she had a boyfriend she forgot to mention in her letters to me. That didn't work out so well. And he only spoke French. I only spoke English, and she said there was no way she was translating what we wanted to say back and forth. After about a week, I says, okay, I bought myself some airplanes. I'm an American, I got a credit card, I want to go home. So I booked a flight back to Michigan. And yeah, she ended up, she was pretty tearful, and she ended up coming back to Michigan as well. At the end of the Christmas break, she said she missed it and really wanted to go back to school. And my mom says, sweetheart, I will buy you the airplane ticket. And so she went back to France, and I stayed in the United States, and that ended up being a really good situation. Since I just bared it all out right there, then what happened, Lynette?
Okay.
We bumped into each other in Bible class.
Well, no.
Oh.
So that was Bible class.
That's true.
During Bible class, I'm listening to him talk about buying tickets to go see her and going to France,
Oh.
and I'm just like, man, what is this? What is this? And of course, I didn't learn till later on that she ended up having a boyfriend. Yeah.
Not so great.
Not so great. So we get to spring quarter, and we bump into each other at spring quarter, and he tells me that they broke up. So now the woman of the dreams is not in his picture, and I'm like, okay, yes, this is it, right? You would think, yep, you can come back on the couch now. So you would think that, okay, now is the moment, because I just keep, all these times, when is it going to be my time? And he says, what are you doing this summer? And I said, well, I'm working at Andrews this summer. I said, what are you doing? He said, me too. And I was like, yes, this is great. But I'm trying to be chill.
It would have been.
Don't be. Well, it just so happened that I had an apartment. I couldn't afford the dorm, and so I got permission to move off campus. So I had a little apartment off campus, and I had a roommate, and we split it. And so I thought, great, I've got my apartment, I'll be all set. And then my mom called me, and she said, Lynette, I really need you to come home. I've had this issue with this worker, and I need you to work at home this summer. And I thought, oh, man.
Her mom owned a care home with 12 residents, so they would take care of elderly people.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, Mom. So I got a friend of mine to stay in the apartment so that I could keep it for the next year, and I went home for the summer. I thought, what can happen in a summer? We're only talking a couple months, right? So summer went by, and I came back in the fall.
All right, in all fairness, at Andrews, there were these essential workers that would stay around during the summer. There were a handful of us in those days. There might have been maybe 10 of us, maybe 10 total that are still on campus working and doing things. And you get to know each other really, really well. We'd go to the beach all the time. I mean, hey, Andrews is great for beaches. And so you get to know these people, and for whatever reason, these It doesn't sound believable the way I'm saying it, so.
It's not.
But let's just say there was kind of this expectation that this young lady and I were kind of dating.
Okay, now this is where I got to interject. So unbeknownst to me, I come back from my summer with my family, and I'm at my apartment, and I don't have a car because I can't afford one. And my curling iron breaks, and I've got to go to Myers to get one.
Hey, I got
And
a car.
Who do I bump into but Todd, who's got a car? And so I asked him if he could take me to Myers to get a curling iron, and he said yes. So we go to Myers, we get a curling iron, we come back, and we talk, and nothing is said about the summer at all. Not anything. And so I'm like, this is really great. So we talk the next couple of days, we hang out, and I'm like, okay, this is my time.
And I was very, very interested in you.
Yep.
And you knew it because we talked about it at length. And we knew each other really well. We'd written many letters back and forth. We even recorded cassette tapes and would send cassette tapes back and forth to each other and stuff in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
I
don't
would
have any
record.
of those left.
I would DJ all this really cool music for her. Yo, and I miss you, Lynette. And here's this new song for you, or whatever. Well, I had to unbutton my shirt though when I would, you
Yeah.
know. And so, but we started getting close. I told her I was interested in her, and then I got thinking about it a little bit more. And the issue was this young lady who was really a very sweet, kind person. I think she was a little bit more interested in me than I was in her, but we hadn't really clarified what that relationship really was. And I got thinking about it. I invited Lynette to Vespers. A group of us were having Vespers out on the beach, which was really cool again, by the way. The beach is awesome. And I realized, whoops, somebody's like, you're inviting Lynette? And she's going to be there too? And I'm like, oh, well, okay, well, I guess I see how that looks. So it broke my heart, but I really thought about it, and I thought that the right thing to do was to let Lynette know that I really hadn't closed this door all the way, although I didn't feel like I'd really entirely opened it all the way, but I really needed to not try to have two ladies going at the same time would be totally uncool.
So it's not like going to a beach Vespers on a Friday night. And I think for some weird reason I had like this vibe like something is not right. But I couldn't put my finger on it the whole night long. And so it really wasn't till the end of the night when he said, let's go for a walk, that I thought, oh, why do I feel nervous about this? And I have to say, he was really sweet about it, but my heart was broken. I was like, come on, really? Really? And he took me home, and I remember going to my apartment up to my roommate and crying and saying, this is it. I'm done. This is it. No way. And of course, I had never really told him how interested I was in him until that week. And then when I got home, my mom gave me the lecture, you never tell a boy you like them. And I'm like, thanks, Mom.
Bad advice, by the way.
Yeah, I'm crying now. And so I just figured, and this was right at the beginning of fall quarter, I said, okay, this is it, time to move on, trying to find somebody else because this isn't going to work.
All right, so I'm looking at the clock. They're probably getting antsy. And I'm thinking that what we probably ought to do is speed it up a little. Oh, it's time. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're right. At
Yeah,
this
that's
point,
true.
I feel like I'm kind of in between the chair and the couch. By the way, it's really the problem. It's really the problem. So here's what happens. What ends up happening next is ultimately I ended up talking with Dee Dee more, and we shared what we really thought of each other, and so on and so forth. And we flushed all this out. Basically, at Christmas, we explained to each other that this was not going to work out, our relationship. And I knew who it was that I was interested in, and it was Lynette. And so what happened over Christmas, Lynette?
So I got a card at Christmas time from him, totally out of the blue. Yeah, you can come back on the couch.
Were you
And
surprised?
I was shocked to get a card. He was very cryptic. It was just something
It was
like,
meant to be.
when you get
It was
back to
trying
campus,
to hook the fish.
we need to talk.
Yeah.
And I was like, wonder what this is all
I
about.
also wanted to make sure that you weren't going to burn the card and not ever talk to me again anyway. So, yeah.
So we got back, and after Christmas break, met him in the library, and he asked me out on a double date.
Yep. Oh, in fact, I think all of our dating at this point, well, no, I shouldn't. Most all of our dating was always group dating. It was
Yeah.
always
We just been
at
with
college.
friends.
Just always
Yep.
lots of people going places and doing things and having fun. And there's 1,000 stories we could tell you that would be kind of interesting. But what ended up happening was she ended up going on a mission trip to Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
And while she was at that mission trip in Puerto Rico, I was like, okay, I am 100% committed on this, and if I don't tie her up, not literally, thankfully, and seal the deal, then I don't want to lose her, because I knew that I wanted to be with you forever. And so when she came back from Puerto Rico, I ended up meeting her at the Chicago airport. Yeah, you're right about that. We're getting a little closer now. But I met her at the airport at Chicago, and I said, I wanted to surprise her. I brought flowers too. And I'm like, I'm just going to drive you back to the campus. Everybody was driving back on the bus, but not you. I was going to have you in my car. And somehow, two of our friends who were also on the Puerto Rico trip, they're like, oh, you got a car? I want to ride with you too. So it was a really nice trip with the four of us on the way back.
Yeah.
Come a little bit closer, don't you think? Yeah. So we definitely were getting to know each other. In fact, I'll tell you what was interesting. What is our next slide, by the way? Oh, we should have showed the next slide.
Oh,
so here's some pictures from Andrews. Oh. I think she wanted to put that in there. I'm not really. I'm assuming you're oohing about the water tower, because it's really
Yeah, 'cause
awesome
there's
there in the
water.
front there. A little tiny patch of hair in those days.
Yeah.
And so there was a total changer right then at that spring break mission trip. After that, for the next 3 months, we really began dating quite seriously. And I don't even know how it started. I don't think you even know how it started. But basically, one of us did a date, then the other one would set up a date for the other person, and then we would keep trying to make that date a little bit more impressive for each other.
We're a
And
little competitive.
It was really competitive, which is pretty much our marriage, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so we were, every time, so, if she took me to this place, I'd take her to this nicer place, or I'd try to do something fancier, and she'd do something even better. And then finally, she did, let's see, is that?
This is the next slide.
All right, let's see the next slide. Will it show us?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
So
this is really,
yeah, so
all
it
right,
was-
the one picture, the boat is before we get engaged.
Yes. So the boat was the last date before we got engaged, and it was my turn. And I was like, okay, I've got to pull out all the stops, because this guy is really hard to top. He's really creative. He's really hard to top. But I'm a college person, so I'm like, how can I make this really cool?
We're both poor,
Yeah,
really
we're
poor.
both poor. And down in Berrien, there's all these sailing boats and stuff, and I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take him out on a charter.
In St.
How-
Joe, yeah.
How impressive will that be? So I'm calling all these places, and they're like telling me all these prices, and I'm like, I can't afford that. What am I going to do? And so the last guy that I called, he had the coolest sailing boat. Jacques Cousteau went on it, all this really cool
Do
stuff.
any of you know who Jacques Cousteau is?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see it's all
And
the older
I
hands.
was like, what am I going to do?
And by the way, Zsa Gabor owned
Oh,
the
yeah,
boat
she was on it
before
too.
Jacques Cousteau.
And
I know, right?
so I'm really scrambling what I can do, because he told me the price to take it out, and I'm like, I can't afford that. So I said, okay, this is going to sound really wild, but can I just rent it in the dock? Like, not leave the shore at all, but just rent the boat. And he goes, really? And I said, yeah. I said, I'm going to make my boyfriend dinner, and we'll have it on the boat. But we're not, we won't sail it. We'll just have the dinner
can't
on the boat
afford
and
to go
dock.
out. We
And he
just
goes,
stay
you know,
here.
I've never had anybody ask me that. And I'm like, okay, I'm desperate, we've got to make a deal. I don't even remember what he charged me, but I'm like, okay, I can afford this. So I got a friend to nab Todd, blindfold him, twirl him around, drive him all over, and then bring him down there. So they let him on the dock, and he ends up going, oh my gosh, I'm on this boat. and I made him this really cool dinner, and that's the picture of us on the boat. And he was pretty impressed, and I said,
no, I was monstrously impressed. And partly because
succeeded.
I've always been a water guy, and we've discovered since then, it's just in my spirit. I was raised on the water, always was around the water. I loved water. Boats are my thing, all that kind of stuff, you know, hundreds and hundreds of hours of driving boat. And so sailing vessels are something I fell in love with. So the fact that you did that was always really, really super cool to me. Then shortly after that, we went to a friend's wedding, a joint friend. We both knew Rodney, and we went down to North Carolina. And I remember while we were down there, I said to Rodney, I was his best man at his wedding, and I said, Rodney, how do you know when you should ask somebody to marry you? And dumbest answer, smartest answer, he goes, oh, you'll just know. You'll just know? Yeah, you'll just know. And I'm like, oh. So I think about it for the next day or two, and I'm like, well, I just know. I mean, that's why I want to ask her. So I decided I would ask her if she would marry me, but I knew she was expecting me to ask her, and of course, wanting to be competitive, I decided I was going to not make it easy for her. And so I talked to my boss, and I planned this elaborate event. Now, first of all, I staged this whole idea that, by the way, the boss is having this swimming party. We're going to go over to her house on Sunday, 2 weeks from now. Would you like to go? Oh, yeah, I want to go. That's really neat. And then I planned this whole thing, which is a story in and of itself. But let's just say that essentially, before that, I told her I was going to set up this treasure hunt for her. Oh, that's kind of cool. And in that treasure hunt, she ended up having to go to the Apple Valley grocery store, and every single place she'd go, there'd be this yellow envelope. A big yellow envelope had her name on the front of it. She'd open that envelope, and it'd give her a clue, and then she says, oh, here's inside was just airplane tickets. It's like, what? So she went to the local airport where my roommate, of course, we're poor again, right? So my roommate he's got one of the school's planes, and he flies her from the Andrews Airport into Benton Harbor. When she gets there, there's a rental car waiting for her. In the rental car is a cassette tape with further instructions so that when it says take her to the mall, at the mall, there's a pager in the glove box.
Yeah.
The pager gave her a phone number. When she calls the phone number, it tells her to go to this particular locker box or whatever. I don't know. There was a locker box. She had to listen to the radio station and get a certain code.
I had to go to the farm and find a colored cow in the dairy.
Which has always been the laugh because she comes from, her father was a farmer, although her mother owned a care home. To me, a cow is a cow. It doesn't matter if it's a baby cow or a big old bull, right? Not to a real farm girl. She's like, no, they're calves, and they're cows, and there's bulls. And
So
those are
I'm
three different things.
Walking through many, many cow barns looking for a colored cow.
I'm not tackling no big cow to spray paint it. I spray painted a baby calf because that's all I dared do.
So a couple.
By the way, it was natural, healthy kind of spray for him. Orange. Neon
So,
orange, by the way.
Several barns later, we go for the calves, and I'm like, well, we certainly didn't find it in the cow barn, so let's keep going. And he didn't tell you, but his friend came along and videotaped this whole thing. So if you're ever bored on a Saturday night, we too have this entire thing on VHS from the good old days.
And the whole thing was also staged so that she could take her best friend with her.
Yeah, so my best friend
So that she and her best
I
friend did this whole
did
adventure
this
together, and then my buddy went along. And it ends up that they get back in the car, they end up driving to the beach, and at the beach there was going to be a buried treasure.
Yes.
And
so,
when she got there, surprise.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, this is it. You don't go through all this and not get proposed to.
Right.
And so I'm like,
But I
okay,
did not want to give you that.
We are at the end. We're supposed to dig 2 feet deep down, which he barely got sand over it, so there was no 2 feet to dig. We open this treasure chest, and I'm like, all right. And I look down, and I'm like, wait a second. There's Pop and 2 roses, one for me and one for my roommate. And I'm like, no. This is supposed to be the proposal. I'm so confused.
So we she played it, I could see it in her eyes, but she played it off pretty well. And but I had this little secret that I hadn't really shared with her, and I'm telling her, well, we just wanted you to have some fun today, and wow, it's almost time, we got to get going pretty soon if we're going to make it to my boss's swimming pool party. So long story short, as we get to the boss's swimming pool party, just her and I, the boss says to me, oh, you guys are the very first people here. why don't you go put your suits on, go get in the pool, everybody else will be here later, no problem, we'll have supper later on. So unbeknownst to Lynette, there is nobody else coming. And when she gets in the pool, and we didn't really do rings in those days, we had a watch.
Watches.
I reach over the edge of the pool, very slyly pull out this cha-ching, here's your engagement watch, and I proposed to her in the swimming pool, which, by the way, then you don't have to kneel, by the way. Not that I was opposed to the idea of kneeling, but I was afraid I'd drown if I did. But I did get as low as I could, and I asked her if she would marry me, and she started laughing and laughing. She says, I was not expecting that. I goes, that's exactly what I was going for. And, of course, she said yes, and I gave her her watch and whatnot. So she's all excited.
Yeah, and his boss is his boss's house.
Oh, really nice dinner. Oh, yeah, come closer, though. That's a little better. Yeah, okay.
And she made us a dinner for two, so we had a dinner for two, and I thought this was cool, this was good. And so I'm thinking, best day ever, super cool. And of course, like I said, back in those days, because we didn't have rings, it was the watch. I said to him really slyly, I wonder when I get to work tomorrow, how many people are going to notice the watch? Because I'm like, I've got the watch now, and it's on the right arm and all that kind of stuff. And he plays it really coy, like, yeah, we'll just see. And so I don't think anything of it, and he drives me home, and the next day I go into work. Well, in the office in admissions, there's a big center area where everything's together, and that's where my desk was. And on that day I went into work, the secretary for the VP, she had a side office, and she said, I've got to leave today, could you cover my office? And I said, sure. So I went in there, and I was working, and probably like an hour or two later, one of my friends comes in and says, Lynette, you got to come out and see your desk. And I'm like, I don't have time, I'm busy. And so she goes away, she comes back a second time, she says, Lynette, I'm serious, you got to come see your desk. And I'm like, now listen, it's not very often that you get to fill in for the VP secretary. I am not leaving my post. So she leaves, and she comes back for a third time. She says, Lynette, I don't care. You have got to come to your desk. And I'm thinking, what is going on? I just can't figure this out. And also, nobody is noticing my watch. I'm like, really, people? Nobody is noticing the watch.
So let me tell you what I'm seeing. Unbeknownst to Lynette, I also had another plan, and that is that I really wanted to give her roses. And I was thinking of how special she was to me, and I really wanted to let her know she was special, and I wanted to let other people know she was special. And I began writing a poem that basically said these important traits. Do you still have that?
I might still have that.
You might still have that. And it would say, just your awesome personality or whatever. For this, I give you a dozen roses. And then, because you're beautiful, and I give you a dozen roses. And it would go through this whole thing. And it got to the point I just couldn't narrow it down any, and I ended up deciding that I was going to give her 10 dozen roses. Mm-hmm. So 10 dozen roses, 120 flowers, which was really interesting when I was calling around on that, because that really blew most florists' minds. These days, not so much, but in those days, they didn't know what to think of that. And one guy thought he was selling me 120 rose bushes, and I'm like, no, I don't need the bush. Cut the flowers off. So, again, tight budget, so we're being careful. I bought these in bulk. Then we ended up buying the baby's breath to go with them. We went to every Meijer, like 5 Meijers, and got all the vases so they would be matching. And then I never thought about how you carry 10 dozen roses to somebody's office. So I got all my buddies with me, and we're all carrying coolers just with like 4 or 5 dozen in each one, and there's just jungle of flowers everywhere. So we walked in the front door. It's this fishbowl area, and there's nothing but secretaries all the way around this room, and they just and it's all anybody talked about. And that's why they're running in the back telling them, you got to come out here. By this time, nobody in the administration building is working. There's like 80 workers. None of them are working. They're all crowded in this one area. What's going on? He's going to propose. Nobody walks in with that many flowers unless they're going to propose. Well, they didn't realize I already had proposed.
So my friend tells me, you've got to come. And I'm just like, oh, I just can't believe this. Well, to leave this office, there's a slew of all these people. And I'm thinking, what is going on? Why is there all these people?
So you're having to weave through the crowd
so
just to
I'm
get to your
weaving through,
desk.
and I'm short, so I'm like going, what is this? Trying to see around it. And then I see my desk, and then I see him, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And then everybody's staring at us, and I'm thinking, but wait a second. He proposed yesterday.
I hadn't thought about that.
So now I'm really realizing that they're thinking he's proposing, but I'm thinking,
I didn't know there'd be this big of an audience.
yeah, he already proposed. So then, of course, I go to my desk, and the entire desk, I mean, there's no space where there's not flowers. Get the poem, and then, of course, I'm looking at him. Now, dude, I don't know if he said it.
She says, oh, he already proposed. Oh, he already proposed. Oh, he already proposed. They're all like, oh, proposed. They're all like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, the watch people, you know, the watch. And
then eventually, I'm sure some of the bosses are like, all right, that's enough. Everybody back to work, you know,
yeah.
whatever.
And
but the whole building smelled like, frankly, if you've ever been to a funeral home before when there's just a million flowers, it smelled like flowers like crazy. They started spreading these roses everywhere because Lynette needed some workspace. There was none, but I hadn't thought about 10 dozen roses before.
So I took one in every office on our side of the building.
Pollinated the whole place.
Yeah, had my flowers in it, so everybody got to share in that till I took them home. And so we were kind of the talk of the campus. Everywhere I
boy.
would go, people would be like, oh, you're that girl. The
Had a
one
friend
with
of mine.
the 10 dozen red roses.
They were really close, and he was going to propose. After that, he came to me and he goes, thanks a lot. And I'm like, why, dude? And he's like, how am I ever going to top that no matter what I do? I was going to propose next week, but now I will look like a heel. He says, it'll just look foolish. I'm going to have to wait a month or two until this dies down a little bit. So.
Yeah, it was a little hard for my dad to swallow, too. He said some comment like, well, you can't live on flowers.
He told me, yeah, he did say, he says, you can't eat flowers.
Yeah, you can't eat flowers.
He's like, and I'd asked him if it was okay if I married her. And of course, Larry loves to torment people a little bit. And so he just kind of paused. It seemed like it was for a month and a half he paused on the phone, you know. But it was really only a couple seconds, I'm sure. But I told him I wanted to ask for your hand in marriage. And he says, well, and I'm on the phone. And he says, we haven't known you for very long. And I'm like, oh, no. And he goes, but what we do know of you, we really like. And so he gave me his blessing. That's when I asked her after that. So it was pretty cool.
So we got engaged, and I still had a year to finish school. And so we spent that year planning a wedding. I wanted to get married at my grandma's. It had always been my dream to get married outdoors. So we spent the next year finishing up school and planning for a wedding, which leads to our next slide.
Yeah, so we ended up getting married, and it was really beautiful. It was at Lynette's grandparents'. They had ended up selling it, and they had written into the contract, because Lynette had always talked about wanting to get married there. They wrote into the contract that even though they were selling it the year before, that they would allow us to have the wedding there. After they saw our wedding, they said, it was a bed, they turned it into a bed and breakfast. They said, wow, we could be a wedding venue. That would be really cool. And this day, they'll do $50,000 weddings for people all the time. So come in, pay $50,000, they cater the whole event, and so on and so forth.
No, they didn't show the slide.
All right, next slide. Unless it's stuck. There you go. So there's our wedding. Wow, that long ago? 1990. These kids they were never even born before then.
That shows how old we are.
But I guess that's why Logan's here, right? Because he wasn't born then. Yeah.
'Cause he wasn't born.
It was a beautiful wedding. It was an outdoor wedding. It was just gorgeous. All right, next slide. You know, wedding's a wedding. So we're going to have to speed this up a lot. 6 years later, it was great because my father-in-law, when we got married, he made me promise, because I had just graduated, but Lynette had not. He made me promise we would not have children until Lynette graduated from college. Then after 4 or 5 years, they're like, all right, when are the babies coming? Come on, come on. And so anyway, 6 years later, Wyatt was born. He's in a mailbox there. That ended up being a really cute picture. And that was really cool. Wyatt was a real pleasure. And we'll just keep speeding along, right?
Yeah.
All right, next slide. So 2 years after Wyatt was born, along comes Zane. Now some of you are thinking, okay, I've heard of Wyatt, and I've heard of Logan, I've heard of Sierra, but I haven't heard of Zane. Some of you in my class, we've talked about this before. Zane was a special little bugger. We loved him to pieces. Zane was, we found out when we were pregnant, we had an ultrasound, and then some blood tests and so on and so forth, and they called us in. And to make a long story short, they told us that our child was going to be born with spina bifida. Spina bifida is a birth defect where the neural tube, essentially your spinal column, doesn't close up. So in a portion of his back, when he would have been born, his spinal cord would actually have been hanging out of his body, ultimately, is kind of the idea. It'd be open. Generally, these children can't walk. They can't use the bathroom. They have a lot of other problems that come along, not to mention even just mental issues, because their head begins to swell up because of hydrocephaly. It's a really interesting dynamic as the way that the plumbing in the brain works, that your brain has to produce cerebral fluid. It collects in this little reservoir, a little bladder up there, and then it drains down your spinal column. And when that spinal column is not properly closed, it screws up the plumbing. So, what?
I was going to say, and when we found that out, this is another
Oh,
time
yeah.
sometimes where you don't really see the Lord's hands in things. And we had the appointment to learn that this is what was going to happen. And
we were beyond, I just can't explain how depressing of a day that was. It was
yeah, we
really
had to
something
drive
else.
separately. He worked for MCI at the time,
Oh, I forgot
and we had to drive
We
separately.
weren't expecting crazy bad news.
Yeah. And when we got the news, we were just really, really, really devastated. And I remember thinking, I can't believe this is happening to us. And it reminded me of a class I took in college called Philosophical Biology. And we did a lot of discussions on all the what ifs. What if this happened to you? What if that happened to you? And I remember one of the big questions was, would you ever consider having an abortion? And it's really easy to come up with an answer you think that you're going to do until you're in that situation. And the day that we found out this news about Zane, at the end of our appointment, that was one of the options we were given. And I remember not even really realizing that's what they were saying. And Todd says, well, you know what they're saying? And I said, no.
Because that's what the lady said. She says, well, you have options. We were at a Catholic hospital. They're not allowed to use the A word, the abortion word. And this was in Kalamazoo. And Lynette goes, no, what do you mean? And I turned to her and I said, sweetheart, they're telling you you could have an abortion if you wanted one. She goes, I am not going to have an abortion. And the doctor was like, that's fine, that's okay.
Well, and it was really heart-rending because I felt like I was really solid on that decision that that was something I was not going to consider. And by the end of the appointment, they just painted the worst picture that you can ever imagine. And it's the only time in my life that I questioned if I could really stand behind that decision, because it just sounded like such an awful life, and I couldn't imagine having a child having all those issues and all those problems, and I was afraid that I wasn't sure if I was going to be strong enough to handle that kind of a thing. But
I think you should be closer.
I should get closer. That's better. Yeah. And so leaving that appointment that day for both of us was really difficult. I cried the entire way home, as I'm sure he cried. And many times people will tell you, if you end up having a child with a neural tube defect, it's like a death, because you lose your ideal healthy baby, and now it's replaced with one that's not healthy.
And like Lynette says, the picture they paint is very bleak. We know about 450 people who've had this exact same issue in their family. And to be honest, I don't think every one of them will tell you that the doctors tell you this terrible, terrible, terrible story, and not a one of them was the story as bad as the doctors ended up painting.
Yeah.
So we would just say that sometimes people use this as a way of an excuse to say that this is an appropriate reason to terminate the pregnancy. That was definitely nothing. Our heart said not to do that. We prayed about these kind of things, but they were leading to that, because we came home completely drained.
Yeah.
Just devastated. We contacted our parents. We told them. My mom, she listened to what I said, and when we hung up the phone, I don't know, it wasn't very long. It wasn't, anyway, some of that, when you're so sad and you're so depressed, you can't really put the timeline 100% together, but this is what happened. My mom, earlier that day, was at the doctor's office. And while she was at the doctor's office for her own appointment, she was looking through this magazine, and in this magazine was this article about a child with spina bifida who had fetal surgery for spina bifida. This is a procedure where they actually operate on the baby at about 24 weeks. By the way, who was born at 24 weeks? Somewhere around then. At 24 weeks, they actually do a C-section on the mother, deliver the uterus, cut the uterus open, squiggle the baby around so that most of the baby is facing through this new hole that they made, and then they close or they sew up that spot on the back that's open. And then they tuck the baby back inside, reinflate the uterus with saline solution, and they sew the mom back up and say, there, now try not to have a baby for a while. So my mom read this article and she just was like, wow, that's so amazing that they can do these things these days. Hours later, we tell my mom that we're going to have a child with spina bifida. And my mom, she questioned herself and thought, well, I don't want to give them false hope if that's not, but I'm pretty sure that's what I read. The next day, my mom went to the doctor's office. She's ravaging through their magazine. She finds it. She's like, I'm stealing this. And she just walked out the door with it. And she come knocking over on the door. Of course, you know, I'm not going to work. Lynette's not going to work. We're hiding out. And she says, we knew God lined that up. We called down to the hospital in Vanderbilt in Tennessee, and they set up an appointment with us to talk with a surgeon. We shared our medical record information, and even after all of that, we were the 8th people to ever have this surgery done. So it was a very, very rare procedure. And so we decided we were going to do that. They told us you would be on bed rest from after the surgery until you could deliver, which they wanted it to be as long as possible. Lynette and I immediately, I mean, all of this, we'd been praying about it. We're just, we were just convinced this is what God wanted us to do. And we found out where our baby had spina bifida. We talked to the doctor. The surgery is lined up, and if you can believe it, our insurance company agreed to pay 100% of it. Remarkable, unbelievable. And then we knew we had 1 week's time to pack and move because there were no hospitals down there at the time that could handle what we needed. So we were going to move back to Lansing so we'd be closer to family, and we had neurosurgeons and hospitals there that could work with us. And so in 1 week's time, we just 100% packed up and moved out of Berrien Springs and moved up to Lansing. Had the surgery. Mother-in-law came down with us. Surgery went quite well. There's all this monitoring that takes place and so on and so forth. But to make a long story short, Zane was born. How far along in the pregnancy? 32?
So I was 32 weeks pregnant when I had him. So it was about 6 weeks after having fetal surgery that I went into labor. I ended up getting an infection, and so when I went in, I had hoped to make it another 3 or 4 weeks. That was kind of the goal. But when I got in there, they said, we feel fairly certain that you've got an infection and we can give you something, but if we do that, we're going to have to take the baby. And I thought, no, I don't want to have him this early. 8 weeks early is early. And I knew what had been like when I had been born early. But they're like, no, there's no way around it. You're going to have to do this. And one of the interesting aspects that really helped him is that when I got sent home, one of the things that they gave me was steroids. And my doctor that I went to, who monitored my pregnancy, was not thrilled about taking the steroid shots. And I said, nope, they said we really need to do this. And so when I went into labor at 32 weeks, they did my amnio right there. They came back and they said, well, you're never going to believe it, but your baby almost has complete lung maturity.
Which is really
very,
unusual
very
at that age, let alone for boys,
Yeah.
especially for boys.
So when he was born, he did not have to go on a ventilator because his lungs were almost 100% mature.
Which is a good thing because as soon as he was born, the poor thing was immediately whisked away from us, which, by the way, Wyatt was an emergency C-section. Zane ended up being an emergency C-section. Logan ended up being a C-section that ended up being an emergency. And then Sierra, by the way, was, I remember when Sierra was born, Lynette says, this is the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I'm
She was
not
the
the
good
poster
child.
child for
She was the good
pregnancy.
But yeah, so Zane was immediately whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit. They had already, all of this was planned in advance. We had already worked all this out. All the surgeons and doctors were already on call and on staff. They immediately performed, I think, 3 surgeries on him immediately before we even really got to see him. We got to see him barely cleaned up in the room, and they whisked him away. Lynette has a real problem where it takes a long time for the anesthesia to wear off, and Lynette was, you get up to that floor and find out how my baby is, because they would not let her out of the floor until the anesthesia wears off completely. So anyway, Zane came through his procedures pretty well. He had brain surgery right off the bat. They had to put a tube in. This is really, really, really typical. They put a tube in the center of your brain, and then that tube runs. They put that tube, they take a rod, and they jam this rod down between your skin and your muscle. And that tube would run down behind his ear and down his neck, and then coiled up into his abdomen with enough so that as he would grow, he'd have extra tubing. When he would turn his head, and in fact, that picture, if you could zoom in on it, which you can't, you would always be able to see that tube right down his neck. Most people probably would just think it was a big vein, a really big vein, but we knew what it was. And again, so it was a difficult life. There was a lot that went on. It was really, maybe I shouldn't say it was a difficult. We didn't think of it as a difficult life. We really thought of it as a blessing. We thought of him as a blessing. Never once did I think either one of us feel like, we were handed more than we could handle. We prayed about it, and we loved him. He was a full-time job for Lynette in that there was always doctor's appointments and stuff, and really, medically, he was pretty decent. We become callous to the situation in that I remember when we went in for surgery once, I remember he was having some problems, and this is towards the end of his life, and he was having some problems. We went into the hospital, and I just remember the pastor, he and his wife left on vacation, and they called us. They were going to Hawaii, and they got as far as California, and they found out that Zane went to surgery. And he says, we're turning around, we're coming back. I says, no, this is nothing. I says, this is just brain surgery. And after I said it, I thought, that sounds so ridiculous, but to us, it was not uncommon. And by then we knew over 100 people who'd had this exact same procedure, same surgeries and same everything. And so I remember there was a family that was in there at the time. Their son had been in a motorcycle accident or something, and they were just really tripping out. And I remember looking at Lynette and I, and I'm actually working on my laptop. We're just so chill because we'd been to way too many surgeries, and it just didn't affect us.
Yeah, it just becomes a way of life. You just get used to that's kind of how your life is, that you just don't even think about it really being different. And so, that weekend that we went in with him, it's just like every other time. It was very frustrating because they couldn't figure out why he was having some of these episodes, and we were very frustrated with it. And on this last particular one, it really wasn't till much later in the weekend that we really started getting worried, because it was just, well, this is what you do, and it'll just be another surgery like all the other surgeries that he's had. And so we really didn't really see it coming. And it really wasn't until probably halfway through the weekend that we really started seeing things start to slip. And we started to really get nervous, and the prayers were on. It was, God help us, be with the surgeons, guide us. I just didn't really go in with that mindset of not having a positive outcome. We just figured it was just going to be like every other time. And I think what really touched us is toward the end, our neurosurgeon came out, literally, his face was ashen, and he came to us and he said, I just really don't think that this is going to have a good outcome. I'm not sure he's going to survive this. and he looked like he could just cry right there.
I hugged him because he looked like he was ready
Yeah.
to break down and cry, which is interesting because neurosurgeons are the big fish, right? They're the top of the thing, and
Yes.
often they do this kind of stuff. They do this kind of stuff all the time. But Dr. Bill was a more tender man, and he also did children in addition to adults, which made him kind of unique. But the whole time we were working with our neurosurgeon at Mott's Children's Hospital in Ann Arbor. She is the top of her field. So long story short is Zane went in for this special surgery, and it's called a hindbrain decompression. It just means the brain pressure is built up to the point that they think the brain is being squeezed by the skull. So they actually crack the skull in several places to make space for the brain. And unfortunately, in this particular case, because of other complications, Zane's brain slumped. And when the brain slumped, it compressed the basal artery that's at the base. It feeds the primary blood supply for your brain, and it basically meant he was brain dead. It cut off all the blood supply to his brain. We sat in on a nuclear study where they inject a dye into your blood, and they're watching the brain to see if that nuclear dye will actually travel through the brain, and it didn't. So we knew that he was brain dead, and that was heartbreaking. I do say there were so many things along the way, even though I remember going down to the chapel and I'm just pleading with the Lord. There were so many times when I saw that he was very kind and gracious to us. And one of those, I remember Logan was in preschool. We had him at this Lutheran preschool.
Wyatt.
I'm sorry, Wyatt. Wyatt was at this Lutheran preschool. He'd been going to school because his little brother was going to physical therapy and occupational therapy, so he felt like he needed to be in school. And I called the preschool. It was Monday morning, and I says, Wyatt won't be at school today. And the receptionist must have heard something in my voice a little bit. She says, is everything okay? And I says, no, I don't think it is. We think that his younger brother is brain dead, and we'll know here in the next hour or so. And she, was really, heartbroken over that.
Yeah.
And she says, would you like me to send the pastor up there? Now, mind you, my pastor's gone because I begged him to please go to Hawaii, which they didn't do. They turned around and came back anyway, but he wasn't back yet. And I says, no, that's okay. Our pastor's coming back, and no, we're going to be just fine. Well, she didn't take no for an answer because she sent that sweet Lutheran pastor up to the church anyway, and he showed up within an hour and a half. And when he got there, by this time our family's gathering. Lynette's grandfather is Lutheran, and that's his pastor. And I hadn't really put that two and two together. And Grandpa was completely devastated. This would be the great-grandpa of Zane. And for Grandpa's pastor to be there was really, it just touched my heart that he would do that for us. But Grandpa was just really, 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 really moved by that, and he needed his pastor there.
Yeah.
So there was just many times where I saw God was still being kind. He was helping us through a really difficult situation.
Yeah, so we got the news, and we had to make the decision of what we were going to do, and they offered us the chance to donate organs for the gift of life, and we decided that we were going to go ahead and do that. And the difficult decision when you do that is that usually when you say goodbye to your loved one, you see them take their last breath, you kind of have this finality. And when you choose to do gift of life, you don't have that. They keep them on life support. Right. They run a bunch of tests, and they eventually take them away to do the rest of the things with organs. So your last goodbye, it's kind of like you're saying goodbye while they're still there. Yep. That was really, really hard.
The heart monitor is still going.
Yeah.
His
Walking
respirator is still working. He's still warm.
Yeah.
And he's still laying there in that bed. I have to say the hospital was extremely kind.
Yeah.
And they knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
They've been through this before. We'd been there way too many times. But they have a whole protocol and a procedure, and they were really, really sweet to us. Mm-hmm. And they knew the things that need to happen. And our family was there, and that was really nice. But at some point, I don't remember how they did it, but they were like, okay, the rest of you family need to go, mommy and daddy time, you know? That was pretty important, and I hadn't really thought about that or planned for that. And there were a lot of little things like that along the way that were just really, really precious. But you're right, it was very hard to, when we said our final goodbye, to walk out the door and leave him in a hospital room with all the machines running.
Yeah. So our next.
But we knew it would help somebody. And I'll tell you another thing.
Yeah.
This is another thing that really always impressed me. God laid this out for us a month earlier, and I'll spare you all the details, but a month earlier, Zane had been in the hospital in U of M. And when he was at U of M at Mott's Children's Hospital, they are the organ transplant institution for children in the state. And while we were there, usually there would be a handful of parents that were there. But the last time we were there, the waiting room was just stocked full of parents. I mean, there must have been 18 different families that were there. And what had happened was a child had passed away, the organs were donated, and all these families had been called and beepered and paged to come in because this child's getting kidney, this child's getting the other kidney, this child's getting a liver, this child's getting a set of lungs, this child's getting whatever. And we were there a month before Zane passed away, and we witnessed that, and I just remember my mind thinking, wow, I wouldn't have really, I would have questioned organ donation, except for when I saw that. The sad thing was there were several families there that were not getting organs that I know for positive that when they sat down with us later on and we got a letter that says, we sent his kidneys to a father. In fact, the father, because they sent him both kidneys because he's a father and not an infant, they sent him both kidneys. They did short gut. There was a young lady who I had met the family when we were there a month earlier, and she was born with extremely short intestines. You know, I don't know how many feet you're supposed to have, but many, 20 feet or something. And she was born with like 6 inches of intestine in her entire body or something like that. And they said that they had a match, and that match was going to, they took a section of Zane's intestines for her, and so on and so forth. So those kind of things. When they mentioned organ donation, I think it creeped out Lynette's father that, wow, how barbaric that these vampires are suddenly wanting your son's organs. We had already been prepped. I think that the Lord had already planned that this was something that, although it was difficult, it was something that we had seen really could help somebody. Yeah. And it's still difficult to this day.
Sure.
I would have a very difficult time doing it again just because I knew how hard it was for me. But to see all the lives that were impacted and changed is pretty impressive.
Yeah, so after that, the next couple of days were a blur, planning the funeral, trying to get arrangements and stuff, and you're really busy during that time that you don't have a lot of time to think about it. I remember we did the funeral. I remember thinking it was going to be quite small because, you know, he's just 3 years old. Who's going to come to a funeral for a 3-year-old? And yet our church was packed, and we had nurses and doctors and people that we worked through, and they all came, and we were so overwhelmed with the outpouring of people that came to support us during this time. And it really isn't until after everything's over that it hits you. You're with family, you're with friends, and it really wasn't until it was all over with that it really sunk in, that life was about to be very, very different for us. And one of the things they talk about when you talk about marriage, you think about all the great things and the happy times and everything going good, and you never think about tragedy or something bad happening to your marriage. And I remember shortly after this happened, we had a couple of people that pulled us inside and said, "Man, we really hope that you guys stay together." And I thought, "Oh, what are they talking about? I don't get it." And I didn't think much about it at the time. But as time went on, I started to get it, because when you lose someone, and especially in our case, when you lose a child, it affects both of you at the same time. Usually if he's up, maybe I'm down, or I'm down, he's up. And now we're on the same playing field. Now we're both unhappy and sad at the same time equally. And men and women grieve very differently, and we both did very differently. And it was probably, I said to somebody later, the most darkest time in our marriage. I felt like we were two ships passing the night. I didn't think I would ever be happy again. I questioned why this would happen. Well-meaning people would say things like, oh, you can just have another one, or he probably wouldn't have made it through the time of trouble, or anything. And none of those answers left me feeling any peace.
Right.
I don't think I ever really remember feeling angry with God. I just felt this immense sense of loss, like, where are you in this? Why did you allow him to be in our lives and now he's not in our lives? And I couldn't figure out how we were going to get on and go on from this. And after a while, I realized what those people were saying. I thought, now I get why they say most people divorce in this situation, because I just didn't have anything for Todd, not anything. I couldn't figure out how to make myself function.
Yeah.
And it was a real blessing to have Wyatt, because Wyatt forced us to get up in the morning, to go to work, to do stuff, because he was a reason to keep going on when we just didn't feel like doing it. And I don't know that I ever remember feeling scared, but I do remember thinking, I just don't know if we can survive this.
I think I know what you're saying about the scared part, because I felt dead more than I felt anything. I was numb, and it was hard to feel anything. It was days before I could eat food. And I remember I became a little more fearful along the process, probably because eventually I had to go to work. So I'm trying to move forward. Lynette's not only lost a son, but she's lost a job, her day-to-day activity, and so on and so forth. So it's just difficult for her, I'm positive. And I began being very concerned about her marriage. I'd read a lot of stuff, said that a lot of families don't make through the loss of a child, especially if it's the first child that's lost. In other words, like, there's only one child and you lose that only child. That's like an 80% failure rate. Otherwise, we were looking at a 67% chance of not making it through a marriage. I began reading. Lynette loves to read. She loves to read. Thousands of books at our house. So I thought, everything I could get my hands on. I was talking to Adventist therapists and counselors and so on and so forth. And I began understanding this concept of this even grief. And like she says, any day that I would look at her, she might be doing kind of good, and I might not be feeling good. And so, or if she was feeling really sad and I was feeling a little bit better today, I couldn't possibly try to cheer her up for fear that it would pull me down. And that made it very difficult. And I just remember at one point, and I'd been praying about it, I know she'd been praying about it, but at one point, I just pulled her aside, and I says, Lynette, sweetie, I says, all I know is I love you. I told you I wanted to be married to you forever. I still do want to be married to you forever. I'm not going anywhere. And it seemed like it just, I don't know, instantly everything was resolved.
Yeah, it was kind of like a door burst open, and
And I'm not saying this works for everybody. I'm saying for us,
Yeah.
we were apparently at the right point, and suddenly we said, you know what? Yeah, I'm committed to this marriage as well as anything.
Well, and it gave, I think we allowed and gave each other permission to deal with it in our own way.
Right.
We said, you're going to do your thing, I'm going to do my thing, and no matter how long it's going to take, we're going to end up in the same place together.
Oh my, let me tell you, what a dumb man I was. But I finally figured it out after reading. The difference is that, of course, I'm always the perpetual, everything's going to be great kind of guy. But so to me, if a doctor said to me, Todd, there is a 1% chance that you've got cancer, I'd be like, sweet! 99% chance I am okay. Not Lynette. Lynette would go, oh my goodness, 1% chance I'm going to die. I might not even make it through the week. And she would be really freaked out by this. It's just how we process it. I didn't realize we were different. But once we finally got into this, we realized, oh, now I understand we're both different in how we're processing this. And it's okay for you to process it your way. It's okay for me to process it my way. Then it was okay.
Okay, so now I got to get from the sad stuff because I knew this was going to be hard. So it was.
There's more sad stuff?
No, we're going to get to the good stuff. It was hard.
I couldn't remember any other sad stuff.
I know. And we just got to a better place and things started going along better. And we said we had never intended for Wyatt to be an only child.
And we won't keep you guys forever. We're wrapping it up.
We're really trying to hurry this up. So, so then when we were at this good place again, then all of a sudden I was older, couldn't get pregnant, so I went through a lot of fertility treatments. And after a bunch of fertility treatments where we went, they said, things aren't working, we need to go to the next step, but in order to do that, you have to agree to selective reduction.
Now, let me tell you what it looked like from my side. I'm at my office, I'm working. This is now, I don't know, 5 years? 4 years? 5 years.
Probably 3 years.
Oh, 3 years later? Anyway, so I'm at the office, I'm working, and I get this phone call from Lynn. I had just not been, I was at the office for less than an hour. So maybe it was 9 a.m. or something like this. I get this phone call from Lynette, and she is crying. She is so crying, I can't understand what she's saying. And I'm like, wait, what's going on? Well, what's happening? Well, what letter? You got a letter from the doctor? It says you have to agree to selective reduction. What's selective reduction? Oh, in other words, if they give us this chemical and you have 10 eggs, that you have to agree to destroy a certain number of those eggs so that you won't end up having 10 babies because they know you can't handle 10 babies. Yeah, that's what they're telling me. And she was so shook up. I remember walking, I mean, this is 9 a.m. I barely got there. I walk right up to the admin up front and I goes, I have an emergency, I'm going home. And she just, okay. And I just walked right out the door and I jumped in the car and I'm talking to Lynette on the phone for the whole hour on the way home. And I remember telling her, Lynette, it's okay. Listen, I actually told her at one point, terrible, but I guess it's just as honesty, right? I said, Lynette, who cares? Tell them, yeah, you agree to it. And then, because what are the chances? You might not have 10. What if we're lucky and we only get 2 eggs? We'll be happy with 2 eggs. And you can just tell them that you'll agree to it and then later on change your mind. And she goes, no, that's not right. I can't do that. I have to decide now. And not that I was saying we would do selective reduction. I figured, what's the odds? We're probably not going to have to go through the concept of selective reduction. But she says, no, I won't. And I says, Lynette, then we're done. We're done. We're not going to go through any more of this infertility treatments. If God wants us to have babies, we'll have babies.
And I had been
We're done.
And I had been journaling ever since Zane died. I had really started prayer journaling. I felt like that had been really helpful, and I really poured out to God everything that I was thinking. And after a couple years, when we decided to do this, I started journaling about that, and I just said, Lord, you know, why again? You know, why are we at this crossroads? And I really, really poured it out into that. And so this moment was really frustrating. But when we finally just said, you know what, we're going to leave it in God's hands. We're done. We'll just see where things go. And as it would be, we stopped treatments. We said we're done. And 3 months later, we had some friends of ours that asked us if we wanted to go on a vacation with them. Their kids backed out, and just one of their kids was going, which was a good friend of ours. And they said, you don't have to pay for anything, just, you know, get your ticket down there, and that's it. And so Todd, I, and Wyatt went.
Well, I'll tell you, by the way, those tickets, we flew directly into Key West, Florida. There's a tiny airport there that, I mean, it's tiny. Have you been to Key West? Mm-hmm. That airport there, it is so tiny, there's no bathrooms in the airport. They're outside the airport. It's crazy. And so I got tickets last minute because my buddy's like, hey, what are you doing next week? I'm like, working. He's like, no, let's go to Key West. I'm like, really? My boss told me, he goes, dude, you need to just take the week off and go do this. And I checked, and those tickets, I forget, they were ridiculous. They were like $130 a piece. Mm-hmm. So I was like, wow, that's God just opening up that door again.
So we went on a vacation. We had a really great time. And shortly after
Apparently a really great time.
Yeah, and shortly after we came back for the time, we found out we were pregnant with Logan.
Ta-da!
So you gotta go to Logan picture.
We picked up baby Logan at Key
There's
West, Florida,
Logan.
apparently.
Aww.
So there's Logan with straight hair, by the way.
Yes, yes.
He was so cute. By the way, for the longest time, I thought this boy is not going to grow hair.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
In fact, I have to tell you, it's so funny. The day Logan was born, we're at the hospital. And it's a C-section, of course. All of our children, because of Zane, all of our children after that had to be a C-section. And I just remember when he was born, they take him away because he accidentally swallowed some amniotic fluid. He actually started crying before they took him out of his mother. And
He didn't wanna
so
leave me.
he's inside going, "No, don't take me out." And so he swallows the amniotic fluid. They need to rush him into the nursery. And then after a short while, they're like, "Okay, we need to take him up to NICU." And of course, Lynette's like, "You get up there right now and find out what's going on with my baby." But I remember peeking through the window into the regular nursery, and I'm looking at my baby, who is bald, absolutely bald, no hair on this boy whatsoever. And I look at the little bassinet next to him, and there's this sweet little Hispanic baby with hair like cream. The baby needed a haircut already. And I was like, wow, look at it bald, and that's a lot of hair. It was really interesting. And so, but what a sweet baby. We were so thrilled, and we knew that this was an absolute gift from God. And it was when we finally gave up on doing it our way that God said, "Okay, yeah, you can have another kid." That was cool.
And we thought we were probably done, but we weren't really sure. And then, surprise.
Well, we were having this conversation. Well, should we have another one?
Yeah.
Should we? Shouldn't we? Should we? Shouldn't we?
And
then, we're pregnant
Yes,
already? How's that
we are.
possible? We tried for 3 years before and couldn't
Yep.
get pregnant. All of a sudden, boom.
And you have to realize that when Sierra came along, we had already had 3 boys. And so I had to go in
next slide.
for a level 2 ultrasound. And they said, "Do you know what you're having?" And I said, "Yeah, I was told I was having a boy." And they said, "Well, you better think again because it's not a boy, it's a girl." And Todd just about passed out. I said, "You better blow that up and print it out pink." And they did. And surprise, it was a girl.
Well, after having 3 boys, we just thought for sure. In fact, we had some issue partway through the pregnancy with Sierra, and the ultrasound technician told us, "Oh, yeah, I'm really good at this. I do this all the time. You're definitely having a boy." Well, then later on when we had the level 2, which a level 2 ultrasound is, they're right. I'm telling you, this is honest God's truth. They're looking for fingernails. They're checking the actual size of the vertebrae. They're going through and turning this baby inside out on the ultrasound. So they don't miss anything in a level 2. On a level 1, no problem. We can make a mistake. But there was no denying. It was kind of funny because Lynette goes, "No, we're having a boy." And she goes, "On the screen, it'll look like this." We've had too many ultrasounds by this time that Lynette's trying to tell the ultrasound tech. Ultrasound tech goes, "No, honey, it looks like this." She turns the screen around and shows her, "See, this is a girl." And Lynette's like, "Oh, that is a girl."
Yeah.
And my jaw was on the floor, and I remember going, "Oh," and the lady goes, "What's up?" And I says, "I'm totally unprepared for this. I don't even own a gun. Now I've got to go buy a gun to keep these boys away. Something. Oh my. I wasn't prepared for a young lady, and what a pleasure she was when she was born. Obviously, Lynette loves her 3 boys inside out, and if you've ever been around her with the boys, you know that she does. But that Sierra ended up making a very special place in your heart, as having a little girl does for me as well. But that was a really precious thing for us. And again, we just thought that it was God's way of setting things right for us. We miss Zane terribly so. Zane, we figured, would be 24 years old right now. I can't conceive of that. All I can picture is a 3-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Those cute pictures of him. And what a tremendous personality. He loved sound. He went through physical therapy and occupational therapy. Every day he worked so hard, and it would just break your heart that he would just be almost in tears and exhausted at the end of the day because he has to work so hard for everything. And just 2 weeks before he passed away, he started to walk. How cool is that? Albeit with a walker, but that's remarkable. There were so many things that were precious about him. He loved people. And he would, every single person, he is so amazing. Every person, he had some unique thing that he tied to them, didn't he? And he would I don't remember every person, but like with Lynette, maybe he'd touch her face in a certain way. With another person, he'd get up close and talk in their ear or whatever. Every single person, he had a unique way that he chose to communicate with that person. And when he passed away, what do you think? He knew maybe 150 words. I mean, he had a lot of struggles and stuff. But all of a sudden his language was coming on, the therapists and everybody were like, wow, he's in this awakening state. There's so many things that were just suddenly improving in his life, and then he was taken away from us. And those are sad and heartbreaking things. I still, to this day, have a very difficult time in church when we have songs that are about heaven, because they stir up emotions that are hard for me. And I'm thrilled about the idea of seeing my boy someday, that it chokes me up and I can't sing those songs. When we first got the painting, it's out here in the hallway, that resurrection scene, especially with the baby that's being handed to the parents. That's for the longest time, every time I walk by that painting, I'd stop and I'd just stare at it for 5 or 10 minutes, because that's what I needed to do. And so yes, we miss him. Yes, he made such an impact on our lives in a tremendously wonderful way. I don't regret that God put him in our lives at all. I would take all of that pain again easily for another, year, month, or day. What a sweet child. I wouldn't give up any of that, and yet God had another plan for us, and I trust him completely. And that Bible verse really sets it right out. Lean not on Todd's own understanding, but on his understanding. And he's going to direct our paths. And that's what he's done for us over and over and over. There's 1,000 other stories we could tell you if we had the time. When we moved up here, we decided we wanted to come up and be here so that our son Wyatt could come to the academy. He wanted to be in our house. We had the ability to do that. We moved up here. I ended up losing my job, got a brand new job 3 days later. Thank you very much, Lord. That was pretty cool. We ended up, our house down there sold, the house up here fell through, and then God handed us that same house again, but at like 1/2 the price that we originally even offered. I mean, because it was that whole foreclosure stuff. God arranged for us to buy the house that we had here in Edmore for $49,000, which is exactly what I paid for our very first house in Berrien Springs. And I knew, I'm telling you, when they came back and said, oh yeah, well, $49,000, I'm like, are you kidding me? I knew it. I got home and I says, Lord, I know exactly what you're doing. You're reminding me that you've got it all covered. The same price for this house, I don't know, what was that, 20 years later, for our very first house? It's just remarkable. There's been so many times where we felt that God was taking care of us, directing our paths. I've had people say to me about moving up here, getting a different job, about the cost of having kids at academy. Wow, what a sacrifice you guys are making. And I always tell them, this is not a sacrifice. This is an investment. I'm investing in Logan. I'm investing in Sierra. I'm investing in Wyatt. Little stinker moved to Tennessee. We love you anyway, Wyatt. But those things are so cool. Every time, every step along the way, when we turned it over to God, God worked it out for us, and we're thankful for that.
Yeah, it's really been a remarkable blessing, and you just can see God's handiwork and everything, and the way he puts things together, the happy moments as well as the sad moments. And sometimes I think you almost feel closer to him during the not so great moments than you do during the good moments, because that's really when your test of faith comes through, if you are going to put your whole trust in him. And when you do that, it's just amazing how he works through that. You don't see it at the time, but later on you can really, you can see his leading, and you can just be so grateful for that. And I guess I can't stress that enough. When you are planning your life, it's so easy to sit where you guys are sitting and think, I want to be this, and I want to do this, and I want to be with this person, and really putting it in the Lord's hands is the best place. It's the best thing to do, to just really put your faith and trust in him, and he will let everything else come better than you'd ever hoped for.
Yeah.
And I look back on that too, especially like I said, Zane is a real difficult thing for us to talk about. And, would we do it all again?
Yeah.
And we would, because I have to say that I think I learned more things about my relationship with God when we had him in our life, because we had to completely trust him on so many things. And I wish I wouldn't have always second-guessed stuff. I kept thinking, what is he going to be like? Are kids going to pick on him? I started thinking everything down the road instead of enjoying the moment and just enjoying him, because I thought it would be forever. I didn't think he would be taken away. And now I realize how, goofy that was, because the Lord knew what he wanted him to do, and maybe it was just that he was in our life for a special time to make an impact on somebody, and we don't know what that is. That's the hardest thing that I've ever had to wrestle for, is the why. I don't have an answer why. I can't tell you the reason why God allowed this to happen. I have to give it in faith that there's a reason, that someday at the end he's going to say, Lynette, it's because of this. And it's a really hard thing to do, to wrap yourself around that mindset. But that's where you're putting that trust and faith in God, that there will come a time he will make all things known. And so just really, as you continue throughout your academy experience, whether it be going to college or what you want to do as a career, or that special someone that you think that you hoping that you can meet, is to pray about it every day and just put your faith in God that he will lead you down the path that he wants you to go to, if you put your hand in his, and if you really completely trust him. He will be there for you.
Yeah. And it's not always easy. And Lord knows I've messed up so many times, like yelling at my sweet wife when she didn't deserve it at all. Just even this last week in Toledo, got to tell you, she's kind of helping me navigate, right, which I know I'm not supposed to do. We decided that God actually gave us GPS to save our marriage, and I should have been relying on GPS instead of Lynette using GPS. And so it's a hard thing, but we're circling around this restaurant that's kind of obscure. It's like in the strip mall, and I'm going around the building, and I'm yelling at her, going, "Oh, surely it's got to be here. Where is this street?" And she's like, "I don't know. Now it's to the left. Now it's to the right. Now it's the..." So sometimes you'll mess up, and you have to say you're sorry.
Yeah.
But I love you very, 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 very much, and I have no intentions of going anywhere.
You better not.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I have a little bit of a surprise for you. Oh. It's not 10 dozen roses. I can't afford that these days, no. Hey, can you guys play that video for me? So I made, there's the Gardner family today, by the way. Thanks for showing those last couple slides. We threw Wyatt's girlfriend in there, Mrs. Morgan's adopted love daughter. That's pretty cool. We're so glad that she's in our family. But yeah, the guys are going to show you a little video clip I put together. It's just pictures.
Oh.
And it's 50 photos of you and me. It's pretty quick, and it's got a little bit of music that goes to it. But they were 50 pictures of you looking. It is funny, though. I got to tell you real quick. There's something about Mrs. Gardner.
Okay, I'm panicking now.
You can
I don't
snap
take good pictures.
10 pictures of Lynette, and 9 of them she's going to be going.
Yeah.
There's something, I don't know what it is. Somehow her brain knows exactly when the shutter is clicking, and she's like, "How did you get the picture?" I have no idea, honey. You looked fantastic up until that 1 second.
Yeah, I don't honestly think
But
we
I
could
didn't
really
give you,
have 50
but I
pictures.
didn't give you 50 bad pictures. So, all right,
Maybe.
you can play it. There's Niagara Falls. Make me blush.
And we don't get on social.
You're going to make me blush like the microphone. Well, just in case Mr. Garcia is watching, I do have a license. So, as he says, have any of you ever heard Mr. Garcia say that before? He goes, the difference is I have a license. So, anyway, it is a real pleasure, and I love you very much. And it's been fun 32 years. So we'll see if we can get another 32. We'll see how that works.
There you go.
Or how about forever? Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. All right, let's pray and we'll wind out tonight. Heavenly Father, thank you so very much for you working through Lynette and I's life. I hope that it's a demonstration to the young people that are here today that they can turn their lives over to you and they can trust you. Why wouldn't we want the master planner, the master designer, the person that created ourselves, that knows me better than I know myself? Why wouldn't I want you making my plans? So Father, so many times we get ourselves stuck in the way. Help us to sometimes step away from that so that we can let you be in charge. You've definitely worked through Lynette and I's lives and have found ways to work through our weaknesses and to give us a better life and a better marriage than we even expected was possible. Thank you for constantly looking out for us. Thank you for all 4 of our amazing children that we dearly love and are very proud of, Father. We just ask that you'll bless each one of the students that are here in this school today. Father, wrap your hands around them, bless them, and show them how you can lead in their lives as well. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. I think they're dismissed, right? All right, you're dismissed. Thanks for your patience.